Okay, what a hard act to follow. Actually, he's probably done some of the groundwork that I'm going to recover, although perhaps not as clearly because I put in the title some tentative musings on the nature of morphography, and I really do mean very tentative. These are ideas that I've been working on for a little while as I've been looking at topology and as I've been looking at the Japanese writing system. And a couple of recent papers which were late in production on the one that actually was the Unger, and I'll talk to you about Unger later, but the response to it with Pendel. Okay, so those are some of the background pieces. I really, it does feel very tentative and perhaps even incomplete, so I ask for your indulgence with all of that. Does this click? It's not clicking. The arrow's not moving. Is that not moving? No problem. And to try to organize it, I put it into some kind of framework of parts. So it's opening remarks on what I mean by morphography, it's some definitions. But I really want to talk about the difference between partial and full writing systems, which is actually something I talked about in the last conference here, but didn't manage to write up the paper. I was unwell. And it's that idea, I think, is so very, very important. And some of the implications in terms of visual discrimination. I think that's exactly what really David's talking about. I would say, because I'm talking about morphography, that it's morpheme knowledge that we're building. So perhaps I'm echoing what David's going to say. But I would like to go into a little bit of a sense of the grapholinguistics and what it's actually going to tell us for visual word recognition. We're kind of related, but we're not actually doing exactly the same thing sometimes. And I just think that that's an important point to kind of make. Okay. So the conventional division of glottographic writing systems is into logographic versus phonographic, with further subdivisions into syllabaries and phonemes. Yet echoing Sproats and Goodkin's recent claim, the standard definitions of logogram or logography really do lack clarity onto the two key aspects, the target language units and the linguistic property represented. We go back to who actually coined it, Gelb in 63, and he's saying logogram, the word sign used in logography, particularly he was trying to point out the idea of not ideogram. Logography or word writing, a writing in which a sign normally stands for one or more words of the language. So, not very clear there. And then another definitive kind of reference, often referred to, Daniels and Bry, logogram, a character that denotes the meaning but not the pronunciation of a phoneme. Well, I think there's a significant shift underway. Moving to recognize that logography is the wrong term. And more precisely, as the definitions have so often said, as I've written about in the past, is gaining wider credence and acknowledgement. Even Daniels recently has said a definition of the name of the logography can be redefined because of the indeterminate word. It is preferable to recognize that the symbols of logography denote not words, but morphemes, hence morphography. And specifically recognizing that any morphography needs some device for denoting structures of speech that are not recognizable by morphemes. Well, exactly, that's the whole point. David has just made as well. The need for phonographic devices are important in this, right? So my definition is a morphogram is a graphic representation of both the meaning and the phonology of a specific phoneme of a particular spoken language. But contemporary morphography of special relevance. We've learned a lot about ancient writing systems, and most of them being of this kind, but really there are only a couple that really actually have the status of being this now. the Chinese and Japanese, really, at the full extent. So reflecting the relatively recent affirmation, arguably grapholinguistics yet to adequately address the complex nature of the morphography. So given the close interdependence of morphography as a principle of graphic representation and the lexicon of a particular language, I think contemporary morphography is of special relevance to study how it's being used now as well, to understand not just in the past, but with the need for large lexicons. So my thoughts here today are from the perspective of the Japanese writing system. Okay, so now let's shift to the partial and full writing system, and Japanese writing systems add a unique solution to this. And say, well, okay, we recognize that the independent creations started with pictures such as the head and the tree, etc. However, with the serious limitations from both production and perception perspectives that we have with pictograms and expanding them, we had to make a development. And the pinnacle of human ingenuity was the rebus principle. You're all familiar with it, but here's a quick reminder. Get back on the bus. Actually, that's so funny in some ways, because what it's actually neatly underscoring is the problem of how to represent the abstract notions such as productive affixes in the re, right? Pretty clever cartoon, but missing some of the underlying nuances of what's going on there. But writing systems must be capable of fully representing a language. So phonographic writing systems can grammatically express all the sounds of the language at either the syllable or the segmental levels, so therefore writing systems. But ergo, it follows that a morphographic component of a mixed writing system must be supplemented by some phonographic devices to become a full writing system. Well, okay, we've also noticed the tendencies in phonographic writing systems to incorporate elements of morphography. That's the reverse trends, right? And it's useful to be able to have symbols that differentiate, again, night and night and all these other versions. But that's a topic for another presentation, or David's already covered it. But now let's look at the Japanese writing system. How have they solved this problem? Well, we know that they're famous for having the 4 component scripts, kanji, which were the originally Chinese characters imported. So they're a morphographic writing system, and they're used in Japanese for native Japanese and Sino-Japanese content morphemes. And then eventually 2 pseudo-graphic writing systems emerged, the kana, katakana and hiragana, and they now are being used for different purposes. Hiragana for grammatical phonemes and katakana for foreign Japanese, essentially. And of course, we've also got a 4th component, romaji, which we'll hear more about tomorrow from another speaker. Essentially, these component scripts are generally used together in largely separate and complementary ways, but there is a huge amount of graphomatic variation. So it's ubiquitous. You can find all different variations. And really, one of the big problems when you've got a writing system settled on the morphemes of that particular language, how do you deal with foreign words? Well, these 2 examples from Chinese and Japanese are frequently cited as the borrowings. And of course, they're not really 2 separate words, two separate morphemes. These are monomorphemic. But they're very rare, actually, right? And Japanese grammatic convention is script demarcation. So contemporary foreign language clearly signaled by katakana script. So bus te, the bus stop. All right. And so I can write this and say, let's get back on the bus ni modoro. And what happening here is the katakana is representing the bus, and all the grammatical elements are being represented by the hiragana, and they've got a kanji for the verb's stem. Okay. So some implications for visual discrimination. Well, writing systems not functional if you're unable to identify the grammatic targets. We've already talked about that idea. Here's another little cartoon for you to consider. It's kind of saying, oh, can't get these, and the problem with my glasses, I put these on so I could see the screen. I can't actually see you at the moment, really. But I hate trying to figure out all these incomprehensible characters. What do they mean? And we need so many of them to communicate. And then the wife turns and says, kanji, and I says, emoji. Well, that again is a topic for another presentation as to whether they really could be a writing system. But yeah, okay, so kanji have a reputation of there's lots of them and they're difficult to learn. But in fact, actually, there are guidelines. The standard use is a list that was propagated by the Japanese government. The latest version of 2010 prescribes 2,136 kanji. 1,026 are taught in elementary school. Now, of course, there are wider sets on my Keitai. I just know here it is there. I've probably got about 6,000, which is the standard number on electronic devices, but actually 90, very high number of the Japanese in written text is Joyo kanji. And of course, as Dave was kind of saying, there is a kind of control in the balance of how they're combined, right? So actually, this is the stroke count of the 2,136 Joyo characters, and they range from 1 to 29 strokes. But you can see that the mean is about 10 strokes. And when you think about how many letters you would have in an average size word, right? And these different elements that make up each of those letters, it's a real similarity, right? So the balance, the sweet spot in terms of numbers, right? And of course, we can list the ones that are very similar. So there's the water and ice, and then there's a kind of rest, but there's add a stroke and it kind of changes, right? So what actually is part of the learning? It is actually a kind of building up the lexicon bit by bit. And so you'll get character tests, and this is one I pulled off the internet, but it's very typical of the books I would see. Kids riding trains, doing their homework and looking at this, and it'll be asking which is the right character to fit in to make the correct word embarkment, to leve, right? And it's the top one in this particular case, right? It's that kind of test they have over and over again, looking at the differences between those elements as part of the learning. And of course, even when you're inputting, if I was inputting the word homophone ow, most of the meanings are relating to meat, and I got a list that would come and pick out the pieces that I could choose. Mouse doesn't work as a cursor, right? Or these pieces down there. But I will also be able to pull out the differentiations of the meanings to help me. So it's actually telling me to meet with someone, to part ways, or in terms of a general meeting, or meeting undesirable things, or to meet someone who's close to you, as in Chris, or meet by coincidence. Now, another aspect of the Japanese writing system is there's a twist in terms of the fact that they relate to native Japanese and Sino-Japanese. So just in that different examples I showed you, they have the same pronunciation of ao, but we have gakkai, association or conference like we're having now, or we could have oze, a tryst. I knew I was going to use that word. Disaster or unexpected meeting, and they're all got a different nuance, right? And in fact, again, this sense of the way that words will build. So we've got an association. I've just forgive me, I haven't put all the readings here, but I've tried to indicate that I've got the sense of the association in this particular instance. And so we've got the Japanese psychological association, Nihon Shinrigaku, Shinrigakai, Ninshi Shinrigakai, right? Building words all the time in this pattern. So thinking about this last section, analytical decomposition mindset within the graphical linguistics. I think we're always trying to decompose, and the fact that we're now going to featural level is really interesting and very valuable. But as the common assumptions of one-to-one mappings are misguided, Osterkamp and Schreiber propose a notion of polygraphy. However, their definition crucially depends on their interpretations of the references of morphemes, free graphs, and divisible. How far can we divide? And it's crucial in the sense because actually potentially ambiguous. As the majority of words in all languages are represented by multiple graphs, they're meaning it's a unit, like the H's that you're being added and being mentioned as the extra piece. And they would say that that is not divisible as a extra letter. They would say that becomes a whole unit. But they've also, in that paper, suggested a related notion that monography, one graph, and they said specifically 2+ linguistic units. Well, I think that's missing a huge number of Sino-Japanese, native Japanese morphemes that are single characters, such as river and fish and sky and birds. They're all single characters, kawa, sakana. More recently, they've also made a proposal for a topology, and the merit is that it aspires to be more adequately capturing the nature of the writing systems in the mixed nature. Demerit, I think it really just comes down to a graph inventory. They do mention combinatorics, so it's close to David's notion there of the previous speaker, but basically just a list of that. Well, okay, there's 1,136 prescribed characters. There's another set, right? We can count them, but that doesn't really tell us how they're being used. And I want to suggest that the dichotomy between what's going on there really in the bottom-up and top-down processing within visual word recognition, often cast as assembled versus lexical processing, a distinctly Anglo-centric notion out of the irregularities of the English writing system originally with Coulthart, and David has criticized that focus. And I do think that is still a problem when we come to actually talking about how these scripts are being processed. I don't think there are dual routes. I think there's a single route. And we must understand that it gets into there visually, and then there are things going on. But it's not as if I'm going to be switching from kana to kanji as I'm reading. You just take it all in, right? And key issues are yet to fully explicate how the role of morpheme-specific knowledge within the processing of graphematic representations, such as how can you recognize both kawa, the kanji, and kawa, the kana, and the activation is river, because that's what it can mean, right? Or it could mean other things in the world. Also, interesting variations in terms of a single character being differentiated. It represents to iku, to go, and okanao, to conduct. And these are issues that I've tried to study in the past myself. But to investigate the differences between phonographic and morphographic writing systems, I just want to tell you about the famous Stroop 1935 seminal study within visual word recognition, finding that participants are slower to respond to a word color when the word itself is a color word. So let us all try to say that. I'm going to show you a word and you're going to shout out red, which is the right answer. And I'm going to show you this word and you're going to shout out green. Right, you all pause a little bit. Being demonstrated in an interesting study by Shimamura, second generation Japanese, back in 87, did it for kana and for kanji, but the observed faster naming for the hiragana condition, but greater interference for the kanji recognition. So it comes into the same visual system, but they're not actually being processed in the same way. And I don't think it's right to think about roots. I think it's the matter of the brain work, the networks are doing something different, right? But here's also an interesting little twist on this. He indicated spatial location stimulus, which could be indicated by a conflicting arrow within a box. So I'm going to show you a box, and you've got to name the position of the arrow as quickly as possible. Top, right, even though it's pointing down, right? And then he did the same thing with the kana in terms of a position. So it's migi, but it's on my left, so I should be saying hidari, right? And I should be saying shita, bottom, because it's a ue, the character, right? And I'm looking at this, I always have to stumble, and that's tiredness anyway, but I'm stumbling. It would be if I was just not so tired, right? And the results actually had some English participants. They had greater interference for the arrows and words, but words were named faster. And Japanese participants, again, naming faster for hiragana condition, however, interference greatest for the kanji condition. So we have to recognize that there's a kind of immediate access to meaning. And so just to very, very quickly, I know I'm running out of time. As I coming towards the end of how to put this together, these rambling thoughts, I wanted to mention a study I did a long time ago, which was actually just a constituent morpheme priming. Two kanji compound words. I was either showing the first character, such as in here, gaikoku, outside country, foreign. So I showed outside or country, and across 5 different kinds of principles of morphological combinations, a lot of more interest in morphological awareness. And basically the results was that compared to the unrelated, I found the same level of priming. So even a second constituent can prime. It's semantically orientated, right? And so closing remarks, well, we need to explicate for both the phonological and morphography how is meaning represented. We have basically, and still even in both fields, in graphical linguistics and visual word recognition, continuing to look at the phonological to orthography, the one-to-one or whatever the relationships are remaining of that model. But we need to, I think, pay more attention to the green, how we get from the visual to the meaning. And that was the model I proposed. Actually, I think the better version is the extension by Marcus Taft, if you know him, in Australia, who said, well, let's put some extra levels. And I've omitted those, but proposing the idea of an abstract lemma that connects all of this piece. And really, ultimately, that's what we're trying to explain, how it connects together in its complexity. The advantage of this kind of model, I think, is actually in their lemmas. And in the case of the Japanese, it has to be able to process kanji and kana and the alphabet, and it has to deal with the Japanese readings, native Japanese readings, and the Sino-Japanese readings, and linking to all the semantics and syntax. So thank you for your immense patience. Hi.
Do you have any thoughts on the well, processing is one very important aspect of morphography, but in some encoding.
Sorry,
encoding, like writing or typing.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on the role of morphography, especially in creative or playful use of morphography? Because in Japanese, when you go outside of conventional prescriptive writing, there is a lot of interesting things happening in hiragana, katakana, and also kanji that can be considered morphographic, but very unorthodox way of using morphography.
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. That's what I think I in the previous papers have been talking about. So you would know those and have been at the same conferences I presented. I mean, I do absolutely agree with you. There's this potential for the word creation, and the Sino-Japanese words are very creative. It is that, and we can talk about shukatsu, right? The activity, and then konkatsu and all the other variations that came out of it. So it was a katsu as a sense of doing, and it became very, very productive in terms of all the students will do job hunting, and it goes shukatsu is the abbreviation for it, but it became looking for a marriage, so konkatsu, and all kinds of variations on that kind of productivity. So yes, it's very creative, as morphological, right? And as I presented at the conference last year in Italy, was exactly the whole point, is saying that the study by, name escapes me, Hatano, was exactly that they showed that the people were able to recognize the meanings and recognize the much better than English people in the understanding Latinate elements, but all in Japanese, they were able to kind of recognize a definition for slightly academic words and put the together, the definition and a word written in kanji or in kana. Much better than the English comparison group. So that was exactly what I think about asking about. Yeah.